Hello and welcome everyone to this exciting webinar, How to Perform Automated Testing of Secured Mobile Apps. My name is Zoe Gardner and I will be your host this morning. A few things to note before we get started. Can I ask a few of you to raise your hand to verify that everyone can hear us? Excellent. Listeners are automatically on mute for the webinar. If you have a question, please write that in the Q&A section. If we don't get to your question during our session today, we will follow up with you after. Joining us today is Marcus Merrill, the VP of Technology at Sauce Labs.
Hello.
Marcus, please say hello to our listeners. Thanks. Also joining us today is Kurt Dusick, the Senior Product Manager of Mobile DevOps at Appdome.
Hey, everyone.
Great. Okay, great. Welcome to you both. Let me go ahead and set up the problem that we're here to discuss. Automated mobile app testing is a key part of the DevOps pipeline, but the cyber team often mandates protections that block automated testing of mobile apps. As a result, development teams have a hard time doing what they need to do to get done to be ready for an application for release. They are often left to use automated testing for the unprotected app and only use manual testing for the protected app. Kurt and Marcus will discuss how to overcome this obstacle using Appdome's Build2Test with Sauce Labs' automated mobile app testing service to achieve automated mobile app testing on any protected mobile app. Marcus, I understand you're going to start us off with a bit of background on Sauce Labs and the problem dev teams face every day.
Sure, yeah. So the problem that we see a lot is that the way people do app development has changed a little bit over the past few years, and also it's fundamentally different from how we understand software development previous to mobile development. And I think a lot of people know that by now. Mobile's been a concern for 15 years, but what we find is that people are challenged by having to make sure that their software not only works the way it's supposed to work, but also does it work on all the different versions of the operating systems and hardware devices that are out there at the moment? And then furthermore, how can I make sure that my app is secured when I'm running it in a testing environment? Because when you run it in a test environment, things tend to be a little bit more loose, a little more open, a little bit more vulnerable. So how can I make sure that I can run a secure app in a test environment in a device cloud or a set of devices where I can not only test my business logic, but test it while it's secured on these multiple kinds of different versions of hardware and operating system, stuff like that. So Sauce Labs and Appdome are working together to try to present us an easy solution for getting people to be able to be confident that their app is both secure and compatible with all the different versions of hardware and software that are out there right now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that information. And Kurt, I would like to understand how, and if you could show us how to use Appdome's Build2Test service to solve these problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Marcus and I are going to go through the process here. I'm going to give an overview of Appdome, how it works. And we'll give basically kind of this overview of how to develop a testing strategy that is effective, that factors in security, and that really, is comprehensive. And I think we all can understand the idea of this is a mobile first world. More or less, I'm guessing everybody on this call today has a mobile device, owns has had many in their past and will have many in their future, and it's just kind of becoming the new normal. And I think we agree that, if we're in a position of delivering applications, that doing that at a high level of quality is difficult, and compromises have to be made. And typically that comes around with regard to security, where a lot of mobile apps are really just not protected. The reason why is because that's difficult. First of all, when you're trying to do that yourself, I really like this diagram because it gives an overview of how much change is taking place in the mobile landscape. So between new devices being developed and sold, changes to the operating system, changes to frameworks, changes to different developer tools, there's so many different things that are coming along and that are changing trying to manage that, internally is very difficult. And so Sauce Labs has great coverage of that, at the infrastructure level, and Marcus will talk to that in a minute here. But we also need to address that at the software level, which is when we're considering, for all of these new versions of the software, there's new vulnerabilities that are potentially there. And there's also the potential for how do we create accurate tests around that. And so, I think kind of the idea of, that we want to focus on here is how do you develop a testing strategy, from the start. I think I'll kick it over to Marcus to set that up for us.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is how a lot is determined like by the industry that you're in, and context is everything. And what I see a lot of in both security and in functional testing spaces, that in one way, and so in one way, they're a little bit starting to merge. So if you're a functional tester, there's a good chance that you've rubbed up against security quite a bit in recent years as technology has advanced and as people are trying to shift left, because security traditionally has been almost an afterthought. Like, oh yeah, we also have to do security testing. Let's have a third-party firm do that on some release that was from 6 months ago or something like that. And companies are increasingly trying to get that to be moved earlier in the process, because I mean, vulnerabilities are they're moving. The bad guys are going faster than the good guys for the most part. And furthermore, people are finding new ways to exploit older technologies. So you got to make sure that the current app that you're making is just as secure on an older phone or something like that. Because especially if you run a site where the kind of app where people tend to not upgrade their phone every year. So, for example, this is why I'm saying you have to determine, where are you coming from? What's your industry? What environment are you in? If I'm in an elder care management system where I create apps for people to be able to help out with something like hospice or retirement center, I have a very, very different core audience and expectation for the devices that will be used compared to something like TikTok or Fortnite. So you can't approach them with the same strategy. Yet I see this all the time, where people think, well, if it was good enough for an e-commerce company, it'll surely be good enough for the bank I'm working at right now. So the test strategy is brought from one to the next without consideration of where the security has to be, how functional testing goes, where we have different kinds of coverage, how we build our infrastructure. All those questions are being done practically in a lot of companies where they should be done, strategically, where you should have those conversations first. Is that making sense, Kurt?
Yeah, it does. And I think there is, the idea of what is a protected app or what things do we need to protect against? I think, nobody wants their customer data out in the open. Nobody wants their API keys, easily read by malicious actors. But there's this idea of what makes an app secured. And, I think at the core idea is this idea of resiliency. So being able to say, okay, we're doing more than just, obfuscating our code, right? Or we're doing more than just, making sure our keys are protected and making sure that our process is secure. That needs to be done as part of the development experience, right? The code is secure and we're using good libraries and things like that. But this idea of resilience, where people are looking to specifically game the app, right? They're not looking at repackaging the app. They're looking at, understanding, okay, is there something we can get out of the app that's going to inform how we would level an attack against a backend, or level an attack against the API, or level an attack against the higher order system. So, the mobile device, I think, is what at times a lot of people don't appreciate is kind of the gateway, or it's kind of the first crack in the armor that a lot of organizations aren't quite aware of, or they're not considering that, hey, this needs to be protected with the same level that we put into our firewall, and that protects our databases, right? Or that protects our cloud infrastructure. And so,
I mean, if you think,
go ahead.
Just real quick, like if you think about it from a functional standpoint, this is where functional testers tend to start getting involved. Like if you people barely even try to attack firewalls anymore. I think people try it, but it's a fairly solved problem how to secure some of those things, at least against the known threats. When you present a text field to your user, that is a direct line into the database. So if you don't secure that front end, it doesn't matter what you're doing with the firewall. You're just you have a key straight to the database. So you need to protect it, right? I mean, that's kind of what you're getting at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like we showed with that slide, let's see if I can kick the screen sharing back over there, but I really like this slide that shows the level of complexity here, right? So, you gave the example of a text input field, but there's a new version of, every feature is a potential vector, right? I think accessibility testing is kind of the next thing that's coming along, is a huge risk right now. The good thing about accessibility is we want everybody to have a unique experience, regardless of their ability. For every good intention, right, there's a bunch of actors waiting to exploit that. And so now that something that's potentially a new feature or a new capability ends up becoming something that is, a threat vector. And so we want to test it, but we also need to protect that, right?
Yeah, and it also it worries me sometimes, because I've heard at some security conferences, people will just sort of talk about how we need to shut down access to accessibility things. It's like, no. Developers don't need yet another excuse to stop working on accessibility for their users. Accessibility is not only a moral issue, it's actually a business issue that it opens up new layers of audience. It also exposes you to liability if you don't do it right. So what we're trying to figure out here is not how do you shut down the accessibility features? How do you make it to where they can't be exploited through bad practices and sloppy design?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you made this point, we were talking about this before. I mean, that dovetails back into what is the goal of this testing that we're doing here, right? It's not to have 100% coverage just to see 100%. It's about giving value to the business in an intentional way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, once again, it gets back to a little bit to context. Like, if you're at a bank, you probably need to demonstrate some amount of code coverage because there's regulatory compliance issues that you have to deal with. But for a lot of companies, I find that, if you have a CTO that came from a bank and they're going to something like an e-commerce company and they still demand this high level of code coverage, where you're like, well, the user profile editing page it's not producing any revenue and hardly anyone ever goes there. So why would we want 100% code coverage when we'd be giving up the opportunity to do better testing in another area of the product? So you batten down the hatches, you make sure it's not vulnerable, you make sure that it works, but like don't spend all your time in that area if it doesn't materially affect your revenue or open you up for risk. So
yeah. And I think that, again, there's mitigating the risk, and then there's the idea of automating the things that should be automated, right? Let's let the automation do what it's good at. Let's let people do what they're good at. And I think, what we're presenting today, especially with Build2Test, which I'll demo in a few minutes, is this idea of, okay, if we can have security, right, which is in a lot of ways a quantitative thing or deterministic, right? If we say, if we can detect it in a way that, say, this is a malicious act, or this is a fraudulent user, or there's something going on with the network traffic that we don't trust, right? When we have the checks for that and the ability to confidently detect that, then it's like, okay, great. Now we can push that to being something that's automation. That's, we want the trues to be true and we want the falses to be false. And so when we can detect them in that way, we're pushing security into the same way that we're kind of pushing automation, or the valuable parts of the automation and testing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always difficult to sort of make some of these decisions. You have to make trade-offs, and you have to make sure that, you've at least identified the risks that you're trying to mitigate, trying to test against. But truthfully, when it comes to having a human do the same repetitive act over and over and over and over again, you get less and less out of it every time, because they stop sort of paying attention. I mean, you use your eyes to do testing, and when you first encounter a new product, you're looking all over the place at stuff, and you're trying to see if things line up and match up. And at some point, you stop being that energetic and that careful, I guess you'd say. At that point, you offload this to the computer, right? You make the computer do the repetitive thing. You know that computer is going to do it at the same high quality over and over and over again every single time. Whereas with a human tester, you want them involved still, absolutely, doing the more critical stuff around user experience and qualitative measures, not quantitative measures, and making sure that you can protect the user experience both from security issues as well as making sure that they can actually get their work done in a way that is not terrible. I mean, everyone watching this presentation has probably been angry at an app on their phone within the last 24 hours. Usually when I ask an audience of 500 people, nearly every hand goes up. When was the last time you were enraged by the functionality of an app? And so when you combine the fact that we mostly do functional testing in a device farm that's not even a device farm, you do it here, you do it on your phone, and that's one operating system on one device. And at most, a manual tester is going to be able to do like 3 or 4 of those. And that's also going to be on an unprotected app. So what we're talking about here is being able to scale up, because when you add the protection, there is a risk that it will interact with your code in a bad way that will also drive down user experience. So you want both. You want protected apps at scale in a test environment where you're not having to manage the infrastructure yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how we get people to scale.
Yeah. And then at some point, the thing that you want people looking at is the output of that, right? Hey, we ran dozens of tests across dozens of devices or hundreds of devices, and this is the anomaly we detected, right? Hey, let's measure, is the protection degrading the performance, or is it affecting the user experience in a quantifiable, measurable way? Let's do that automatically if we can. And then our focus is on the things that are really going to drive out. The hands are on the things that are driving value. So yeah, that the idea of is getting somebody to take that first step to say, okay, we know this is a problem. What do we need to do? Like, what is that first step of doing that? I think being able to have this stuff automated, as the first motion is a key part of that. I'm going to jump over and I'm going to show Appdome, and I'm going to show how Build2Test works with Sauce Labs. And just so, basically let's put a picture to what we're talking about. And then there's a polling question here. Feel free to answer that around basically, how are you, if you're a QA person, how are you being involved in the security testing? And over here on my screen, I've flipped over to the Appdome platform. This is how we deliver Appdome. Now, everything I'm showing you today is via the web UI, but this is all can be automated via CI/CD, whatever your platform of choice, whether that's GitHub Actions or Jenkins or Bitrise or whatever you're using to drive the automation. We have a plugin that'll interface nicely with that. And so the idea behind Appdome is you have your portfolio of applications, right? So this is what we see on the left here is what your development team is going to be producing. This is what we're working on. So I've loaded in the Sauce Labs demo app, which I think is a good sample here. And what I can do now is define what we call a fusion set. And the fusion set is really a security configuration. It allows us to select what type of protections we want to add to our application and the ability to configure that, right? So in this case, I want to enable data at risk encryption. And so this is going to give me the ability to now encrypt all of my everything in my file store that's going to be used as part of the application. That's going to be encrypted automatically. And I have a few kind of sub options for that. And I have many different types of protections that I can apply to a given app across kind of different categories. So for things like encryption or operating system integrity, secure communication, we have over 150 protections across iOS and Android that can be enabled as really basically features in your application. So before, where enabling something like man-in-the-middle protection would take a lot of development effort, defining what the scope of this problem is. How do we address this? How do we verify network traffic? How do we know that our headers haven't been spoofed or manipulated in some way? Being able to empower your developers or educate them on these features really is a huge challenge. And the idea behind Appdome is that it's going to enable these protections as features like you would enable in your firewall, right? Just like you would enable in any other kind of security tool or protection tool. And so that's really the key difference between Appdome, is this isn't an analysis tool. This is a protection build platform. This is going to live as part of your build process and deliver those protections directly into the application, directly and automatically. So on every single run of the automation, we have a range of these protections that we can apply. And this spans more than just kind of things that are static. We can look at things that are actively looking to or actively trying to manipulate the application as it's running. So for example, things like running the app in a virtualized way, key logging, screen overlay, specific types of malware. So for example, Magisk, which is a commonly used malware that's installed on a device, that then its job is to look into other applications and interfere with other applications. So being able to build this type of protection into your application is something that we enable, again, as a feature that we can enable, rather than going through and creating a series of backlog items or development process to how do we defend against Magisk? Well, most mobile developers, they're not even really aware of this type of thing. And so the idea behind Appdome is we're delivering all of these protections as part of the build process. So once we've enabled these protections and these run through the build process, we want to verify what is actually in this application. And so what we deliver also in addition to the protected app is what we call certified secure. So certified secure is going to be the document that gives you an overview of what happened with this app. What did we start with? What app did we send to Appdome? What protections and platforms, or what platforms we are specifically covering. In this case, this is an Android device targeting these versions of the operating system. And then what protections have been added to this build. So we have a very clear idea of what we started with, what we're covering, and then what specifically we're defending against. And that's where we have this very clear idea of how secure is our app. That's a very big, broad question that comes up, is how secure or how protected are we? Certified secure is going to answer that question every single time you release or every single time you run your automation through your pipelines and through your workflows. That's the value of that. And ultimately, the goal of this is to help you ship that software faster. So there is no question around, you know, are the protections up to date? Are we using the latest and greatest defense? Did we ensure that this was added to our build? So that's where we're going to have the ability to verify and say, yes, this is what happened. And since it's automated, we don't have to worry about it getting caught up in the human process. Kind of like Marcus was saying, where, you know, if you're doing the same human thing over and over again, it's going to get sloppy, or it's going to get delayed, or somebody's on vacation and it's sitting in an inbox or an outbox somewhere and it didn't get passed on to the right person. So the idea is that we can verify that the protections are in every single build of the app. Now, the last thing that we want to be aware of is really to provide visibility into what's taking place. We've applied the protections to the build. We verified and fingerprinted what protections are there, and we have the ability to know what we're protecting against and share that broadly. But we also want to have an idea to know what's happening in our application, and that's where we take advantage of what we call certified secure. Now, certified secure is basically a threat extended detection and response platform. So every time you run your application through Appdome, threat scope is going to be included in that build. So you'll gain this visibility automatically. There's no code to be written. There's no SDK to implement or any code to write to really start to add this type of awareness. We have the ability to see what's taking place on our devices and the ability to kind of drill down into the things that we're concerned with the most. So, you know, if we want to look at, you know, how risky or what's taking place against, say, for example, Android platforms, we can see this, and this is going to give us visibility into, you know, what's happening in the latest and greatest versions, but also what's happening in older versions here. And so the idea here is that, go ahead, Marcus.
I would say I really like this, because what, you know, if I may echo it back to you, what this is summarizing is where the actual threats in the real world are coming from in production live, right? Mm-hmm. These are the real threats. So that when you hook it up to a device cloud that gives you the ability to dial back a couple of versions of the device, or use a different brand, like use a Google Pixel instead of a Samsung Galaxy, something like that. And you could say, I need to, it looks like I am getting a lot of threats from Android 8.1. I do need to keep testing. I thought I didn't need to test that anymore, from a security perspective. So the ability to put this on a device cloud that can give you instant access to any combination of these kinds of devices is where this relationship between our two companies comes in. And I think it really is interesting. Kind of an eye-popping moment for me when I first saw the demo.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to show you, just to kind of layer on top of that, it's great to have this system, this visual display. We can see across, what threats are taking place, and we can see the different builds of our apps. But what's really valuable is being able to take advantage of how we want to test this, or how we want to respond to that information, right? So we have a drill down of, for example, Android platforms and devices, or manufacturers of devices. And, if we need to adjust our protection or our threats against that, we can do that. Let's see here. There we go. We can respond to that by simply folding what we get out of threat scope into our test footprint, right? How do we want to respond to these at the device level? Again, we can make what we see in Sauce Labs mirror what we're seeing as threats that we need to address in Appdome, right? That gives us a very clear plan of action. And just like we see, okay, hey, this is the devices that we want to have a greater awareness of, or be running more tests against, we can look at the attacks that are taking place. So for example, I hover over here and I'm looking at, auto clickers and Android virtualization and debug bridge. Well, my response to that is to simply shift left, right? And say, okay, well, let's look at this at the build level. And then let's look at, okay, I want to prevent auto clickers now. Great, right? So I've gone to the left, I've applied the protections that I need. And then I can move back here kind of a little bit more to the right, where I look at the test footprint that I want to have. And now I can bring those together, because threat scope is giving me that visibility of what's happening, right? What's taking place on the devices in real time. Now, if we take this kind of the how this looks like in the testing process, so I'm logged into Sauce Labs here, and I have a sample application. Again, this is my Build2Test app. And if I drill down into this, we see that the features that Appdome, we see the features that Sauce Labs is providing as part of the test environment, right? These are things that we may need at some point. We may need to capture and monitor network traffic. We may need to bypass certain restrictions or inject certain images for as part of our unit test, right? Now, we absolutely want to be able to do this in a test environment, but we don't want our users doing the same thing, right? We don't want them spoofing biometrics. We don't want them sniffing the network traffic and doing these types of things that we want to have in a trusted environment. So what we have here is with the idea with Build2Test. So if I go back over to here where I've defined my protections, what I can look at is how I want to build my app. And so I have the ability to step back. Oh, let's see here. I jumped the gun. I clicked my build a second too early. But what I have here is basically what I will show is, a vanilla version of my application that would just run out and, hey, we're going to test this. We're going to enable whatever protections, and we're going to run this on whatever devices. And when we're satisfied with this, we're going to deploy it out to an app store, right? So the same thing that we potentially ran debugging tools on, and we ran some network manipulation tools on, well, that's now in the wild for someone else to run debugging tools on, and for someone else to run network protection or network manipulation tools on, right? So that's that delineation, right? We want to be able to do that in a trusted environment. We don't want the rest of our users, when this is out in the field, to be able to do that. So the way we enable that, I'll show you the quick walkthrough in Appdome, is we have this option here to Build2Test. So I have the ability to build my app if I want to ship this out to production. But if I want to enable Build2Test, this is going to be something where, say, I know this app is going to the Sauce Labs trusted environment, and these are the specific things that I want to trust Sauce Labs to do. And so normally, if I were to just send my protected app to Sauce Labs, Sauce Labs is going to bump into that protection, and Appdome is going to gracefully shut that app down because it's going to think, hey, I don't want someone manipulating the network traffic. I don't want someone trying to inject biometrics or spoof the biometrics on the device, right? I don't want someone using an overlay or a debug tool, right? So that's Appdome doing what it does. But now I have another build of my app here. In this case, it's prefaced with the Appdome prefix. And if we see here, the build number is the same, the version number is the same. Our file ID is different, right? There's a difference in the two files here. And so if I were to run this app on any type of device I want to run and start this test, Appdome is going to trust and know, okay, this is the Sauce Labs environment. I know Sauce Labs is doing these things in terms of the debuggers, in terms of virtualization, in terms of screen overlay. It's going to trust that environment, and it's still going to know that there's a protection there. In fact, if I go over to my threat scope here, I can filter the different types of events I have a build to test event. So it's events that took place in a protected environment that we logged, but we didn't shut the app down. And so now what I'm doing here is I have my basic Sauce Labs app, right? I can, test as I normally would. And so I'm doing a manual test here to demonstrate, but whatever test automation I had here, this would just run and execute, but this is still an app that's protected. And so the final level of protection here is that this app is not designed or is not signed to go out to the App Store. So there's no risk of inadvertently shipping an app that has the protections in basically log mode, which is how we respond to that. So rather than, there's no worry about, okay, oops, we accidentally shipped a test build, and now we have a test build in the wild that's, inadvertently underprotected. We have protections as part of build to test that say, don't worry about that. There's always that final stopgap in the signing process that we've put in to ensure you're not inadvertently shipping something that doesn't have all of the protections that you want to have in place. I talked for a long time, Marcus. I know you have something to chime in about.
No, it's good stuff. I think it's a really good way to sort of have extra confidence and knowing that you could run this on like one of over 7,000 devices we have in our various data centers all over the world. That's seems like a pretty good process to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is, that's the integration between build to test and Sauce Labs in a nutshell. And I think, the idea here is that it's always, you start with the idea, you start with the concept. And I'll click it over here to our strategy slide, right? Is, you're starting with the automation at the foundational level, right? If you have the devices, if you have the tools in place at the automation level, if it's available, right? That's the first thing, is it needs to be available. It needs to be trustworthy. And then you have the protections that are available to be applied to the mobile devices to be able to detect what's going on, to be able to protect the things that provide the greatest risk. And then ultimately bubbling that up to, okay, great. Now we have the things we need to take action. And now we can look at the feedback we have and say, great, now every action we take is informed, right? Based on what we're seeing in threat monitoring, or what we're seeing in the test output, what we're seeing in the performance testing we're doing, right? It starts to open up other types of testing and other types of possibilities.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the demonstration, Kurt, on build to test, and thank you, Marcus, for setting up the problem that dev teams face on a regular basis. We actually got a number of questions coming into the Q&A. We're going to try to cover as many as we can in this session. If we don't get to them, we will follow up with you guys independently after. So Kurt, I wanted to ask, or it was asked, would build to test allow a user to use all of the Sauce Labs devices?
Yes. The idea here is, so we're focusing on real devices. And I think that's the value of, anybody can spin up 1 million containers of phony devices or virtual devices, right? The idea here is focusing on real devices. That's the value, is that, having an infrastructure that scales and is updated. Marcus told me they have iPhone 15. So, God bless the person that went and stood in line on launch day to get the iPhone 15. I'm sure you have a better process than that, but the idea to say, hey, on, pretty darn close to day one of this, let's take advantage of that, right? So it goes both ways. We talked about legacy versions, older versions of Android operating systems and older devices that are out there, but also the newest, latest, and greatest, right? Somebody's going to go out there and buy the phone on day one and plug our app into it, so we need to be there again from a protection standpoint and from a testing standpoint.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just real quick, it's just, I mean, maybe as a point of curiosity, but like normally we have the device on day one, and it's kind of, just the effort you described, like figuring out how to procure the app and the device, go get it, stand in line, send people in. The real problem really is with this version was iOS 17 turns out to have a huge number of changes that essentially have to be like reverse engineered and broke, not broken into, that's not the right way to put it. Just like you reverse engineer, like we have to figure out how to manage an iOS 17 in a way that's different and still backward compatible to our current users as they were. And if you're managing your own device farm, like that's the kind of thing you have to consider. Or you have to wait for Appium to come be compatible with it, which Appium is an open source product that's volunteer led. It only has a couple of active developers. So like just being able to keep up with that stuff, it's not terribly easy, and things break, and you have to. So the hardware and the software both are very complicated aspects of this.
I can just see that the device piece is very difficult. You'll be a United States-based company, but they use different devices like the Huawei in Asia Pacific. They trying to get those in a timely fashion to help your customer in the United States, I'm sure, is just extremely difficult. So I think that's a fantastic option for people.
Right. I mean, I think if you want to use Huawei, you have to use our Berlin data center.
Well, there you go. But you have it available.
Yeah, we do. That's right.
Versus trying to find one. Most people in the United States are probably having to look on eBay and ship it here. So it's not feasible, nor is it efficient for either the person testing or the customer. So I think it's a fantastic platform. Okay, another question actually is to Kurt as well. What has Appdome done to make sure dev teams can test protected applications in all devices on Sauce Labs?
Oh, you're muted.
So Build2Test is really, the idea here is that we picked a handful of test vendors to focus on to say, look, here are the people that are doing it right. Sauce Labs came to mind at the top of the list because mainly that infrastructure, right? We show that pyramid, the base of that pyramid is the infrastructure. They've got that real device infrastructure that people want, that people need. And it doesn't make any sense to say, hey, here are threats on Android 10 on a Samsung or a Huawei device that I don't have access to. And then, well, now what do I do? So being able to have a partner that says, hey, we've got that covered, click, 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 you're on a Huawei device on, iOS on Android 9, and you can run that test without any delay or hassle. For me, that's what we want to deliver, right? We can report on all this information, just like we report on the threats that are in play, and you have the ability to respond to those threats. We want to be able to report on the devices that are at risk. And then, hey, you have a partner that's integrated tightly to respond to that, again, on both sides, the shifting left at the build level and shifting right to test and what's going on in the field.
Awesome. Okay, this one actually is for Marcus. What's the biggest value you see for Sauce Labs customers using Build2Test with Sauce Labs?
I mean, frankly, we get questions all the time, like how do we support security testing? In what way do we support FAST and DAST and all the different ones? And we are looking for partners for those sort of other sort of pre-protection, pre-development, like static code analysis, like all sorts of ways of getting security mixed into your app development, as well as these concepts like I think is it DAST testing, where you essentially take a HAR file, take the HTTP traffic from a web session and then replay it back through a tool to make sure that it's but that's all for web. It's not necessarily for mobile apps. So we're trying to not get into the security business, but at least offer our customers a way of having confidence that they can use our infrastructure and make sure that they're doing security testing at the same time as they're getting value out of their functional testing, or before or after. So I see just a really great way of telling people, look, we can put a shield around your app and then make sure it remains a valid shield on, and doesn't break the rest of your app with all these other versions and other devices and everything else. So it's I think it's a great way of offering our customers a path into this very, very critical question.
Awesome. Okay, and then I think we have time for one more. And this, either one of you feel free to answer this one. What can customers expect out of this collaboration in the future? And how do we make testing protected applications even better?
I think my first instinct is just that in the future, I'm hoping that our go-to-market, whatever, I don't want to use inside terms. Basically, support, customer success, sales folks, like everyone needs to, from both companies, should be aware of both things, so that we can make sure that when someone asks our salespeople, what do you do for security? We have just a one sheet that says, here's the answer. Like, here is a great way to tie these two things together. That's the current thought, but also there's some technical stuff. I think we can, if we just sat here and shot the breeze for a few minutes, we could probably figure out 10 different ways to take this in a technical way.
Fantastic.
Oh, you muted again.
Oh, yep.
You think I would know that after COVID, right? So, I think step one is, how do we bring more people together? So we have, these development teams, we have QA teams, we have security teams, and they're all, again, everybody's in a different location. People are on different continents. Some people are subcontracted, right? So if we can have a mechanism that says these teams have awareness of what other teams are doing, what they expect, what their goals are, right? If there's commonality between, hey, yeah, I'm going to ship my app to the test department. That's a different process, or there's some awareness going on here of the difference between shipping an app to test, shipping an app to prod, and what the security review of that looks like, or who needs to be involved here. And so the idea, if you have two tools working in concert with each other, it actually ends up affecting three different teams. Well, then that starts to create a multiplicative effect, right? Because, hey, we're bringing more people together to understand, hey, this is what you're getting out of this. It's creating more velocity for those guys over there, and we don't even have to worry about it. We're not on the hook for this anymore. So that, for me, is how you can add two things together, but actually get much more than, the sum of their parts.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. I think that's all that we're going to have time for today in terms of questions. We will reach out and answer the remainder. Marcus, Kurt, do you have any closing remarks before we close out the webinar today?
No, it's always great to talk to Marcus. Thanks for everybody for coming out.
Yeah, feeling is mutual. Just want to thank everyone for being here.
Okay, great. Well, Marcus and Kurt, thank you so much for partaking in this discussion today. I think it was very worthwhile for everyone who attended to learn more about the problem that devs teams face and how Appdome's Build2Test can help bridge that gap. So thank you everyone for joining, and we look forward for you to join more of our webinars in the future. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.